Whenever you're working in ZBrush, you're often going to find it beneficial to be able to load photo reference directly into the program. Now, that could be loading photo reference that sits on screen that you look at different angles of whatever it is you're sculpting so you can match them. Or you might want to create image planes that line up and register exactly to your model so you can do a one-to-one match. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about the various ways that you can load up photo reference into ZBrush. We'll begin by using Spotlight. Now, we have an entirely different video on using Spotlight as a texturing tool. We also have a different video where we use Spotlight as a modeling tool, so this has multiple uses. In this video, we're going to look at it as a means of bringing photo reference into the program. So I've loaded up the NixZ generic human male model, which comes with ZBrush, and I'm going to go to the texture menu, and I'm going to dock this on the side of the screen. Now, what I want to do is I want to load up a bit of photo reference. So I want to bring in images by clicking the Import button. Now, I'm going to go to the folder where I have actually stored my photo reference. So let's go ahead and grab that path name. And so here I've browsed to my folder with my photo reference in it. I can just change to icons so you can see these images. These images come from 3D.sk. It's a great website that I recommend you go check out. It's subscription-based, and you can download photo sets like this, various types of individuals, different body types, all sorts of different types of people, which make wonderful reference both in costume and out of costume. So I'm going to grab the front image here, and that loads it up into my texture palette. If I select that and then click this button here, Add to Spotlight, it adds it to the Spotlight and brings up the Spotlight interface. The Spotlight interface is this round interface here. If I click in between these two circles, I can move the image around. If I click this button here, it will scale around the center, the orange circle. And I can move the orange circle and it will automatically snap to the centers as well as to the model. I'll snap to the center and I can scale around the center. So here I've got a bit of photo reference for the front of this person. Now I want to add more photo reference. So I go back to Texture, Import, and it will automatically open the same folder. We can grab a 3/4 image, a side image, back image, and click Open. Now these all load up into Spotlight. If I click this button here, that will tile them unified down the sides of the screen, and I'll just close out of this sidebar. So if I want to arrange my photo reference, I can grab it, scale it up, and then just place my reference on the sides of the screen like this, giving myself enough real estate in the center where I can work. So if I've got this 3/4 image sitting behind the front image, or the front 3/4, maybe I want to bring this forward, I'll just click the front button here, and that brings that forward. And I can scale this down, move it over here. Now, if I want to leave the Spotlight interface, I press the Z hotkey. Now that turns off Spotlight's interface, but the Spotlight stays on screen. If I press Shift-Z, that turns Spotlight entirely on and off. If I want to save this Spotlight with all the images in there, I will go to Texture, Save Spotlight, and then I can save this Spotlight as a Spotlight file, so then I can load it back up into ZBrush at any point in the future that I want to start sculpting again. So if I use my move brush, I can sculpt as normal here. But you might notice that if I go to my standard brush, nothing happens. That's because the Spotlight is intended originally as a texturing tool, so it expects there to be an image between your brush and the model. To allow yourself to sculpt while you are looking at Spotlight, so I've got a couple subdivision levels here and I want to sculpt, I'll need to go to Brush, Samples, and turn off Spotlight Projection. That turns off the projection part of Spotlight, so it just sits up there as photo reference. Shift-Z turns my Spotlight off. Z turns it back on. If I want to remove images from Spotlight, I'll just click the Delete button. I'll select an image and click Delete here, and that gets rid of those images. If I want to change the opacity, what I can do is I'll just click over here. Let's go ahead and add another image to Spotlight. So we've got 2 in there. So let's go back to Texture, and we'll go to Import, and let's grab another one of those images from Spotlight. There we go. And we'll tile unified and bring these over on the sides here. Now, if I click somewhere off of those images and nothing is selected, I can adjust the opacity for all of the images like this. So if I want to dial back their opacity, I can do that. Dial it up, I can do that. Select an image, and then I am affecting everything. If I want to affect the backdrop, excuse me, pardon me, the fade, I can do that, and that will fade that one particular image. So there's fade, and then there is opacity. Now delete, deletes both of those spotlight images. Now the spotlight is empty. If I wanted to load up different images, I could go to texture, go to import, and this time I will go to a different folder of photo reference. I'll go to my skull photo reference that I shot the other day. So let's do Command-Shift-G, and let's paste our path in here. And here we've got some photo reference of a skull. So I'll grab some of the skull photo reference that we'll be using in a different chapter as well. So let's say I want to sculpt this particular object. I'll open these images, go to the texture menu, select that one, add to spotlight, select this one, add to spotlight, select this one, add to spotlight. I can tile unified, and then I can just grab these and rotate them. Remember, it will rotate around wherever this orange circle is. So I can position these on screen. I can snap the orange circle by clicking inside of it to the image center, rotate that. Grab this image. Let's rotate this one. Bring this over here. And then press the Z key, so we're in sculpting mode, and I can sculpt on the object with my photo reference up on screen. So that it's using Spotlight for photo reference. It's somewhat similar to PureRef, the application PureRef, which some of you may be familiar with, which allows you to arrange photo reference over your screen. This just lives inside of ZBrush, and it gives us the option to save all of our photo reference in a Spotlight package. Now that Spotlight package is really handy. You can have a Spotlight saved for texturing, a Spotlight saved for tooth reference or bone reference, and it will save all of those images in their high resolution inside that package. The only thing to keep in mind is if you've saved an image in a Spotlight, you can't extract it from that Spotlight, so don't delete your original imagery. So let's take a look now at a different method of bringing photo reference into ZBrush. Let's look at image plane, which is also found under the texture menu. Image plane is something that is more akin to what you would get in Maya, where you have an image plane and your model registers exactly on top of it. So let's take a look at that now. Now, the next method of loading ZBrush with photo reference is under the texture menu as well. We'll tear this off, dock it on the side of the screen. And at the bottom of this menu, you'll find a menu called Image Plane. And inside there, you'll find a menu called Reference Views. And if we open that, you see that we've got a variety of different reference views here. So right now, we have the front view selected. I'm going to click Load Image, and this is going to load up my photo reference folder here. And I'm going to bring up the front view of LIBOR. Now, that loads that up in the background. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the model opacity down so I can see through the model to the photo reference behind it. Now you might find it simpler to see through the object if you change to the skin shader and then turn on frame mode. Now you want to scale and place your object so it's lined up as close as possible with your photo reference. Now, of course, it's not going to be a perfect match. That's why we have the photo reference, so we can move the object to line up with the photo reference underneath it. So once we've got our front view oriented, we will click Store View. And now that saves that view. So I'll click the right view now and move into the head here. And let's go ahead and load an image for the right side view. I'll grab a side view here. Once again, this will load that image plane. I'll scale the model and orient it. Now you see it needs to actually be rotated a little bit around the Z-axis. To do that, hold down the Shift key, click on the background, let go of Shift, and then drag your mouse cursor back and forth. That will allow you to actually rotate around the Z-axis. Let's position that. Get it as close as you can because you will use the Move brush to orient it later. And Store View. Now let's store a custom view. We'll go to Custom 1, and let's make this a 3/4 view. I will go to Load Image, and let's grab a 3/4 image. And then we will position the model as close as we can to this particular view. Now you might find it beneficial to use the perspective settings here. just to get things lined up just right. You might adjust your perspective settings under the draw menu here. We do have the focal length slider, which allows you to change your perspective settings to better match the camera. We can scale this up, move this down, and get it lined up just about there. Then store view. Now if we turn off frame mode, and perhaps we want to switch back to our basic material too, now we can use these reference views as we're sculpting. And of course we can hotkey these. If you Control-Alt-click on one of these buttons, we can set a hotkey. So maybe I'll set this to 9. And we'll say OK. And let's Control-Alt-click on the right view and set this to 8. So if I go to the hotkey 9, hotkey 8, I can switch between those views. And I can also change my model opacity by adjusting the slider. Now, if you've watched the video on interface customization, you'll know that you can drag this model opacity slider and dock it anywhere in the interface that you like. It's possible to place this somewhere outside of this menu so you've got easy access to it. Also, if you watch the interface customization video, you'll know how you can take this slider and put it into a custom pop-up menu so you can have a hotkey that brings that particular slider up anytime you want it. So if you have not watched the video yet on interface customization, I encourage you to do so. So this technique of image planes is closest to what you're going to experience in Maya, where you have a locked image plane that registers to your model, where you can sculpt against the image and line things up exactly. While you're doing this, you may find it beneficial to turn on the lock button here that will lock the camera, so as you make changes to the object, you're not going to actually change or rotate anything. Depending on your video card, you might find as you move the perimeter, you might get this little box where those pixels go away. Just tapping on the background brings those back if you do experience that. Not everyone does. I like to turn on the lock here, and you may also find it beneficial to go to the movie timeline, show, and set keyframes for your camera. That's really useful because it is just a quick way to re-register your camera views. So for example, if I put 2 frames here for the front view, go to right, and I'll put 2 frames here for the right view. If I use my arrow keys, I can switch. Oops, I've actually hotkeyed the material, as you can see there, instead of the camera. So I'm going to click and drag those dots out. So let's do front view. Click in the background, and then I'm going to set 2 camera frames. Now I'll go to the right view, and we have to click in the background again, and we'll set 2 keyframes there. And if I go to custom view and then click in the background, I can set a keyframe there. So now if I switch back to, let's say, the front view, and maybe I've accidentally moved off model, you can just click the front button again and it will snap things back, or you could use the arrow hotkeys to switch between your stored camera views. So it's just an extra layer of ability to return your camera to its default position. So that's the image plane plugin. If you save your Z project, this will save with it. So this will actually save with your project. It will not save with your Z tool. So if you save a Z tool under Tool Save As, your image planes will not save. However, if you go to File Save As, it will save with that. So now let's take a look at one more method of bringing photo reference into ZBrush, and those are background grids. Now, whenever you're in ZBrush and you have the floor plane enabled, you'll see that you've got this ground plane here. If you mouse over the floor plane button, you see that there's actually an X, Y, and a Z plane available. And currently, the floor plane is sitting above the center. So if I go to Draw, here we see we've got X, Y, Z. If I turn on just the Y plane, set that to 0, that drops that down to the center. So now if I turn on X and Z, you see everybody is lined up, and the skull is actually sitting above the origin. Now, these grid planes, they're not like the ones that you find in Maya where you can actually snap to them. They're there as visual guides for the most part. However, they have a very interesting alternative use. If we go to the lightbox and go to grids, you see that we're actually able to use grids as photo reference slides here. This is the skull as photo reference that comes pre-installed with ZBrush. This is my skull sculpture. It's called Spencer_human skull. If I double click that, it will load up that reference into the grids there. Now what it's done is, if we look at our floor plane here and go to draw, let's tear off the draw menu. It's actually, if you look at elevation here, it's changed the elevation, offset these, and it's applied an image to them. If we scroll down here, we can look at front back, and there's the images for the front and the back. And if we look at left right, there's the images for left and right. So we actually have left and right images. So if you roll around to the other side, you can actually see the other side of the skull. I actually created these by just generating them from this 3D model. So if I were to go to the transform gizmo, unlock this, reset it, and then go to the unmasked mesh center, then lock it again, turn on the pizza box stack so we can move everything. We can bring this down, scale it down, bring it back to the origin here, scale it up. There we go. You see it actually lines up exactly. It is the same skull. So let's move this back in space. There we go. So to create these grids, what I did was I basically hit snapshot to grid, and that snapshots whatever model I have open to the grid. And if you look now, it might be a little hard to see. It's actually the textured version there. If I change this from the skull to a sphere, let's do polysphere. Now we're able to use these grids as a reference to sculpt. So what I'll do is I will go to my grid. I can change my grid size, my tiles, come down here. Here you see under, let's go ahead and collapse these menus so it's a little bit easier to see. I have frame opacity. If I change my frame opacity, it'll change the opacity of the grid. I can change the RGB fill. I can change the RGB frame. You can see that's changing the color of the gnomon. That is the XYZ modifier or XYZ guide there. Fill mode right here is the most important thing. I'm going to change that. And as I do, it's going to change how the fill is applied. And if we go to fill mode 3, now we can see through the sphere to the reference underneath. And if I turn on my X symmetry, go to the move brush, I can now start moving the sphere and shaping it to my skull reference planes. Now, if I want to adjust this, I can actually come into my fill mode here, and I can go to edge enhance opacity. I can adjust the edge factor so we can see more of the actual object. There we go, as I'm moving things around. If I go into frame mode, I can still see my polysphere in frame mode. Now I can snap to a side view, and I can start making changes here in the side view, just shaping the sphere to line up with the photo reference of the skull. Now, what's most useful is if we leave this just side view and front view and go to a 3/4, we have these 3 lines. You see there's an X, Y, and Z line there with red, blue, and green lines extending to our photo reference. So if I, let's say, watch that blue line. If I put that blue line right there where the, right here on the image, where the temporal ridge meets the temporal fossa there on the skull. If I put my pointer there and just make sure that that lines up on my other 2 images at the same point, I can move this. I can tell how far out or how far in from the surface I'm moving. Like this point right here needs to be here because that's the beginnings of the cheekbone or the beginnings of the maxilla. So I can use these arrows to help me position points on my model in 3/4 in relation to, like here's the cheekbone, let's bring that out to here, in relation to my photo reference plane. So that's very, very, very useful. Take my standard brush, step up our subdivision levels, and hold down the Alt key, and I can start to carve in the eye sockets. Now, if it's too transparent, you can always adjust using your opacity enhancements here. There we go. Hold down the Alt key, we'll knock back the cavity for the nasal cavity. There you go. You can see how you can very, very quickly start to roughen a shape here. So how do we make our own grids, though? Because it's one thing to use a preloaded one. How do we create our own? I'm going to go back to the beginnings of this sphere, and let's take a look at loading up images on here. we're going to open up front back. Under front back, we've got a front image and a back image. So if I click this image, it allows me to load an image in from my texture palette. And here you see I've got a front image of Libor, who we used previously. So if I click that, I've now replaced that image with a front image of him. If I go to my side view here, I'll select, so if we go to the back image, you see that back image is still the skull. We can replace that with an image of the back of his head. So if we go to import, we can just go to our Libor images, go to our icon view, and grab an image of the back of the head. And there we go. So the back view there, let me turn off frame mode. That's the back of his head. The front is the front. Go to the side view here. So we'll turn off front back and go to left right. We'll open up the side view here. And if we have another side view, we can go to this image here. And we don't have the opposite view, so let's go to import and see if we don't have a side view from the other side. And we actually don't, but what we can do is we can grab this image and flip. There we go. And let's set our scale back to 1. There we go. So now we flip that image so we can see it on either side. Now, of course, I could do the same thing for top and bottom. If I had a top view and a bottom view, I could do that as well. So now I've got these images lined up, and I can now use these as photo reference planes. This is beneficial because it allows you to move around and see your reference in 3 dimensions, and it is linked to the floor plane. So Shift P is going to turn this on and off. Some people like using these. Some people prefer using image plane. It's really entirely up to you and what your preference is. I think the main deciding factor for folks is going to be this edge factor and controlling the opacity, whether or not they find this to be distracting or if it's a way that they like to work. If you like this grid, you can save it by clicking the Save button here, and then you can load up previous saves by clicking the Save button, Open button here. So again, it's an interesting and powerful way of loading photo reference into ZBrush. I think it's quite cool. I use them in my classes. However, my preference for photo reference, if I needed to register exactly, is always going to be image plane. I find that easier to work with. And another tip that I'll pass along is before you use any photo reference, try and make sure that you've registered it in Photoshop, that all the images are about the same size and they already line up more or less. And that's going to make your life a whole lot easier. In this case, if these things are not lining up exactly, you do have the ability to go to, let's say, left, right, select this image here, and you can offset things horizontally and vertically. You've already seen that we can scale them. So you can make things line up a little bit better here in ZBrush, but your life will be a lot easier if the images themselves are already registered using Photoshop or another 2D paint application. Save them out as JPEGs and then just bring them in here. So that concludes this look at photo reference inside of ZBrush. We've seen Spotlight for photo reference, we've seen the texture palette, image plane, and we've seen using grids. We've also seen how you can load up grids that are saved in the Spotlight and how you can customize your grids directly. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in our next lesson. Thanks for watching.